is famous in LA. He historically has taken some big high-profile cases, suing law enforcement for police murder, among other things, but also a lot of activists over the years, pro bono cases. You know, Jaime's been there for a lot of people. Recently, maybe most famously, Jasmine Abdullah in Pasadena. It was a big media case. But he's also got some other stuff going on, and I'm going to let him tell you about that. So, Jaime, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time and talking to us today.
Thank you, Sam. You're a sweetheart, man. I appreciate this.
Absolutely.
It's always good to be a part of the dialogue, right? On these issues, because I think it's important that it gets out there. We're inundated with Fox News and all that crap, so it's good. You're the antithesis of that, and I appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't have the production value, but like, hopefully, nobody's just like blatantly lying on some corporate platform. So I want to start out and just ask you, tell me about your case in Pasadena recently. What's going on in Pasadena? I saw your press conference, and what's the case about?
Well, in the middle of a couple of months ago, a young man by the name of Anthony McLean, who lives in Pasadena, was shot in the back by the Pasadena Police Department. And it was the middle of the day. It was right across from Pintarosca Park in Pasadena. And there were a bunch of people in there. It was summertime. It was closer to the evening. And he was shot in the back, and his friends were there in the park. And there was a lot of families there as well. And of course, the community began an impromptu protest there in the park, across the street from the shooting. The shooting happened across the street. And so what happened was that the Pasadena Police Department was displeased with hearing Black Lives Matter, stop killing another black man. And so what they did was they started pushing the entire crowd in the park into the center of the park. They surrounded the park. And so they pretty much corralled everybody in there. So people started confronting them. It's like, what are you doing? This is bullshit. You guys keep killing people in our community. And at some point, they tased a man who is my client. His name is Trayvon, and he was filing a civil rights lawsuit against him. But during the time the officer was shooting at Anthony McLean, he shot right past my other client, Walter Beasley. And my client could hear the bullets whizzing by. And of course, my client is very traumatized. He's having PTSD. The other thing was another friend that was there who was, he heard the bullets go by him as well, but he was later tased in the park. That's that gentleman by the name of Trayvon Glover. The Pasadena Police Department is resisting arrest and allegedly battering of an officer. And I've seen this time and time again. So I have a policy. If there's an activist who is being falsely charged on the picket line for either one, resisting arrest, or two, brutalizing an officer, I will defend them pro bono. And the reason why I do this is because there's no checks and balances in law enforcement. You know, if we believe the idea that law enforcement can investigate themselves and have an objective view about what occurred, we're delusional, right? And
because it's a closed system, among other things, right?
Yes. I do civil rights cases, and I've gotten the discovery where the cop is blatantly lying to the investigators. There's 3 bodies that investigate a police shooting, and the physical evidence is contrary to what the cop is saying. Never do those police officers get reprimanded, and they're always elevated to a higher position. So in the incident with what's going on, these police killings, one, we defend the community against these false accusations. And two, we filed a lawsuit on their behalf to get the discovery and get the people justice, but more importantly, so that we could open the books on how these law enforcement agencies are practicing and doing things and the inconsistencies of their practices.
Right, and I think one thing that is important to mention is that the Pasadena Police Department, like the LAPD, like the LA County Sheriff's, like all the policing agencies in Southern California that I'm aware of, there may be something anomalistic, like some.
I'm sorry, was that a question?
Violence, brutality, corruption. Nobody's disputing that. Nobody ever in any police department says that's not true, because they've been sued for years and it's all on the record. And Pasadena, I also want to mention that you took Jasmine Abdullah's case here, which was, like I was talking about it before, who's in the photo here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jasmine, and there's a bunch of other activists, and just to kind of set it up for people who aren't familiar with the terrain, she's one person who has been targeted, doesn't really cover what happened to her and what's continued to happen to her with the Pasadena Police Department. They targeted Jasmine Abdullah and have been harassing, and actually, it's not harassment, it's like torture. It's been going on for years and years.
They're doing it now. They're doing it now. I'm representing her in 5 cases right now. One in which she's questioning the city manager and he's divulging policy information, and now they're charging her with eavesdropping, right? Because she made that conversation public about public policy. The second thing is, there was a dry clean laundromat that was close by in this community, and a Japanese American woman had a sticker on the back of her car that said Black Lives Matter. The owner of the laundromat came all the way across the street, went to her front door, and started harassing her for that sign, and was justifying it because he was Jewish, which I find very ironic. And so a lot of people from the community started protesting the laundromat, and the laundromat owner boarded it up. Like, there's boards around it. And so everybody in the community was going and doing impromptu murals, right? And tagging the protests on the wood panels, not on the structure, but on the wood panels. The one time, and the police officers were parked there watching this. They weren't doing anything. The next day, of course, the city workers would come and cover it up. So the one time Jasmine Abdullah was there with 2 friends, writing Black Lives Matter, stop this abuse of black folks, they arrested her for vandalism, and her friends. And so it's I would say that it's selective prosecution, and I would say that we're going to file a Murguia motion to protest the selective prosecution of Jasmine Abdullah. But she's a loud, creative, beautiful voice against police brutality.
She's very powerful, and she's, like I said, targeting doesn't really touch it. And I actually, here's the beauty of live stream. I saw the live stream of her arrest at that laundromat. It was very racist. They were very confrontational. They were just going to do whatever they wanted, and they got shut down because the community that they're in didn't like it. And so it's not okay, and it's going to continue to happen all over Pasadena or anywhere else, of course, because that's the time that we're in.
You want to hear something crazy?
Please.
In that eavesdropping case, the chief of police attempted to ask City Councilman Gordo to file suit, or to give him permission to file suit against Jasmine. He said, no, she's asking me about policy. I'm a politician. It's my obligation to tell her. So now he is the mayor of Pasadena, and he's going to be a witness in one of our cases against the city manager.
The level of corruption and just decades that it's been dug in ensconces, like, this is what you get. I want to pivot and talk to you about talking about immigration, because I know that's another area that you work in a lot, from a bunch of different portals or points of entry. And I also know that you're very current, but I want to on policy, and I want to ask you what you think all right, so the old white guy is on the way out, and the other old white guy is on the way in, and it's Nixon and Reagan or whatever all over again, except it's not, because Donald Trump and his minion Stephen Miller actually did some things that were deadly, that weren't just hostile and racist. Unaccompanied minors died in Tijuana after their remain in Mexico policy. Minors died in Guatemala, unaccompanied minors, after their safe third country bullshit policy. So what's the fallout from Stephen Miller? Stephen Miller's about to be gone, and he's going to go hide out, but what's the damage? And Yeah.
Also, there's like 500 plus children they can't find to reunite with their parents who they've deported. Stephen Miller, ironically, is from Santa Monica, and he's also Ashkenazi Jewish, right? And I'm sure he's had ancestors or family members who have suffered at the hands of Nazi Germany, of fascism, right? And it's just horrible. But anyways, he's proposed these draconian reactionary policies, which of course Trump, being the fascist that he is, implemented them. And so what we had was folks being separated, children being separated from the parents. And then the court, here's the irony, is that the court participated in all of this in that they had some of the children present themselves as their own witnesses in their immigration case when they're like 2 years old, 3 years old. It's crazy. And they had no representation for them whatsoever. So that's what Stephen Miller, but he and the thing is that Stephen, what I find interesting, Sam, and this is the thread that goes through everything, is the prison industrial complex. And the part of the tentacles of the prison industrial complex are the prison guards union, are the police unions, okay? And their endorsement is coveted, right? And so Stephen Miller approached the CBP leadership and their union and said, "Hey, look, guys, you're going to get a seat at the table with regards to policy." And so these guys, some of them very reactionary, and they just stopped. I think it was a Facebook website with 10,000 of them. And
Yeah,
it was a leadership in which they were just saying racist, derogatory, anti-immigrant, making insinuations that the best way to resolve the immigration issue is through death. Just some crazy right-wing shit, right? And so Stephen Miller got Trump in bed with those guys. He gave them a wish list, and part of their wish was, "Hey, let's separate the children with the families. Let's do these draconian reactions. Let's keep people in cages." But see, Sam, this legacy of caging human beings, right, that are seeking to, started with the Obama administration. You know, a lot of people don't talk about Obama deported more people than all the other presidents put together. And those cages, you know, just like Trump said, were started with the Obama administration. And I know that some people are trying to make the excuse, well, it was because the prisons were, as if though there was a rationale for the prisons and or the cages. But here's the scary part, Sam. The Biden administration just appointed to the transition team a woman by the name of Cecilia Munoz,
right.
with Bolivian descent. Her parents were immigrants from Bolivia. She was Obama's top immigration advisor. And in an interview with PBS in 2011, she specifically stated that, hey, separating families is a reality and it's going to happen, but it is what it is, right? She was flippant about that whole issue. And she was instrumental in killing an executive order that would have prohibited the deporting of Central American families. And what we have to keep in mind is that there's a military coup in Honduras. In Central America is just horrid conditions. The gangs have taken over some parts, but for the most part, anybody who dares attempt to participate in the political process gets killed. The assassinations are happening daily.
Right.
And the population is being terrorized. And that's why we have these people. Nobody's talking about what is the source of this problem, right? So that's what and so, I'm concerned about the Biden administration and Harris, because Biden did that 1994 crime bill, man.
Oh, God.
And so it was called the Violent Crime Control Law Enforcement Act of 1994.
Right.
Mandatory minimum sentencing, and it was stated that it impacted mass incarceration. It was also instrumental in developing 3 strikes throughout the country, but there was no provisions for mental health. So anybody had paranoid schizophrenia, borderline personality disorders, these mental health issues that could be easily treated
Right.
and with medication and counseling.
No money to be made off that, though.
Right. Nobody. And then there was racial disparities in the incarceration of people.
Right.
And while Biden was in power, while he was developing this, he was friends with James Eastland, who was a senator out of Mississippi, who was a well-known segregationist, as well as Strom Thurmond out of South Carolina. And they put him on the subcommittee for justice in prison. And that's where Biden began his friendship with the prison industrial complex. And he even stated publicly that he said, we need to abandon this old debate about the root causes of crime, about the inequality of economics and social inequality, the economic and social inequality, which is the source of acts of desperation or crimes. And so he said we have to abandon that and he even stated, let's put those SOBs away.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, he's a reactionary. And then Harris, Jesus.
Well, here's the problem. Now, here's the real problem. Because, so now I guess she's the vice president-elect, so we can talk about it, because people really weren't interested in having the Kamala conversation because they just wanted to get the bad white guy out, get the bad old white guy out to get the good old white guy in. So we're doing identity politics, and she's a very powerful black woman. And, I've met her. You probably met her. I like her, actually. Like, her personality, she's out there. And I was like, wow, she's a force of nature.
Seems like someone to party with, right?
Yeah, exactly. But she's aligned herself with some very dark forces. And I don't know, if you believe that anything that takes you away from God is evil, then she'd fit that bill. She's the problem. Why didn't she prosecute Mnuchin, besides all of the other things that I think you're about to talk about? Right. The cop candidate. Yeah, Kamala's.
Yeah, she's great. She gets a lot of money from the police prison union.
She's like Jackie Lacey.
She said she was the top cop, right?
I remember.
And Jackie, I think Jackie Lacey is a good example of what I think she is, and that is a black face on the reactionary white police state that is attempting to impose a racial caste system through the judicial system by arresting people. But she fought to release fewer prisoners, even when the Supreme Court said that it was overcrowded and it was cruel and unusual punishment. And this was an article in Vox by Germán Lopez. She defended the death penalty.
Right.
And she refused to hold police officers accountable.
And that's the huge issue where she's so far out of step. But, it's like, look, it's American politics, the matrix. Everybody's leveraged beyond any kind of ability to actually, freely navigate, like Cortez or any of these like young upshots. It's like they're all getting the picture now too. Kamala already knows it. You're not getting this office without being leveraged. So should we be like giving her a chance and saying like, okay, maybe she's woke now. She's a mother of children. She's in a biracial family and, identifies as black, and her mother was Indian. And so we know all these things about her. But like last time somebody said, just give this politician a chance, it didn't really go so well. I don't have a good feeling about her, and the thought of her as President Harris, the cop president, is frightening to me. She is in bed with the unions. She's Jackie Lacey. It's the whole thing. Yeah. So I am very cautiously saying these things about her as a white person, talking about a black woman who just took the highest office. And I'm saying them because I'm a journalist in LA and I know her record and I know it very well, and it is not good. It's bad.
Right. I agree. Here's what we have to, I think, because of the way the electoral process, the election system is set up, where there's dark money. I mean, money rules the political spectrum in the United States. And the only way to get elected is if you have oodles of it, right? And so one of the ways to get it is to hold the hand of the prison industrial complex or the police unions. And for the longest time, their endorsement was coveted. I think that's changing now. Mm-hmm. I think that because of the BLM marches, because the community's rising up in disgust, I think that the culture or the idea of law enforcement as this benevolent, force in the United States is turning. I think people are starting to have a critical eye about law enforcement, and I think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have now a mandate, because
Right.
that's what they rode the wave of BLM into the White House, to be honest.
They sure did. And they remember the DNC, the conference, the first 10 minutes of it was like an infomercial for Black Lives Matter. It was like the whole first 10 minutes of it. And I was like, wow, they really. So that was a beautiful thing. We'll see how it plays out once they're in office.
But you know what? I had the same type of hope when Obama took power.
Of course.
You know?
Yeah, I know. And then we looked and went like, what do you mean he deported twice as many people almost as Bush? You know, some of this is like just simply like, yes, they're politicians and they're all compromised in that, but it's like you can look a little deeper and it's like Bushes were from Texas. This guy probably grew up with a bunch of brown people. His nanny was probably like Mexican. His sister-in-law is Mexican. So it's kind of like, and so is that reflective of a problem that everybody needs to look at? Like, why did the black president do that? I don't think it's that sinister. I think it is that sinister, but not personally sinister. I think it's like, hey man, this is the game. You align with whoever you've got to align with, whoever you want to hold, whoever hand you need to hold to get up there. And then good luck navigating that. Let's switch subjects. I want to talk to you briefly about a case that you took recently in Santa Ana. That was about a young man who I actually knew. And this is how small the world of Los Angeles and police killings, and this is actually in Santa Ana, and police murder and police killings reaches. I'm a middle-aged white guy, and I actually know people who have been killed by the LAPD, which is crazy. So Christian Alvarez in Santa Ana, you took the case. Can you tell me about it?
Yes, I was hired by his mother and his sister. He was a young Latino male. And one day, he, his sister, and his nieces and nephews went to a Catholic church in Santa Ana. And he went to the altar. While he was there in the front in the altar, his sister was there, and his nephews were there. He pulled out a gun and pointed it at himself. And his sister pled with him, "Don't shoot yourself, don't shoot yourself." So then he pointed it at his torso. And she was like, "Don't shoot yourself, don't shoot." And while she was pleading with him, standing like 3 feet away from him or 5 feet away from him, she heard shots coming from behind. And it was the Santa Ana PD at the entrance of the church firing at distance at him. Even though they saw him pointing the gun at himself, they shot at him. She said that she saw him get hit and run out. And while running out, she said she thought she saw him drop the weapon. So he goes out the back door. Next thing I see, the video that I've seen from somebody's car passing by, he slumped over forward with his back to the police. With his back to the police, his
in the street
over here, and he's crouched over like this, and the Santa Ana PD is behind him, and they're firing at him from behind, and they're just dumping on him. Shooting him in the back of the head, the face, and he's posing no threat whatsoever. No threat. He's crouched. He's bundled over on the street like this, and it was horrible. It was an execution, a public execution, it's. Here's the thing: is that the city of Santa Ana, and I would say most cities in the state of California, lack the ability to deal with folks with mental health issues like schizophrenia, like borderline personality disorder. And so their reaction is to send out a law enforcement agency who just kills them. I mean, that's not the solution. Just recently at UCLA, a man was brought there and he was having an episode, and the sheriff's deputy was down the hall. He comes out and shoots him in front of the doctors who were telling him, "No, don't do that. We've got this. He's just having an episode. We know how to handle this. We got the medication and the personnel for this." The cop didn't care. And I think that time and time again, if I had a dime for every time I hear about a cop shooting a mentally disabled person, a person with schizophrenia, who all they need to be is talked down in a manner in which is successful, and then not just that, but afterwards give them the treatment. So back to Christopher, it was horrible. I mean, you see the video.
Christopher was having a mental health crisis, and they murdered him. He was
having a mental health crisis, man, and he wasn't trying to hurt anybody but himself. And my client was telling me that she was under the impression, or she was told, that the weapon wasn't even loaded.
Right.
But that he was attempting suicide in the church, and then later was killed by the Santa Ana PD.
Right. So it was more of a suicide gesture. You know, I knew this guy because one of his brothers was a subject of mine in a story I did at the LA Weekly, two of them actually, I think. So some years ago. So I know this whole family. I know Melissa, I knew Christopher, I knew his brother, and I know their mother. And so one of the things that, you know, I've been to so many Black Lives Matter protests over the years since 2013 that it becomes different because you start to know the families. And one of the things that I see happening is like they're very isolated, like Donna Acevitas with Joey Acevitas in Anaheim. What was that, 2012 or something? And she told me some of the same things that I've heard from this family. And that is that, first of all, everybody just kind of collapses and like attacks each other. And they're very isolated because the police just murdered their kid. And then the police started harassing her. And they've done the same thing to this family in Santa Ana, and I'm not sure exactly what happened because I don't know the facts, but it has something to do with like what happened to Donna Acevitas after the cop killed her son, Joey Acevitas, in Anaheim. And that is that the cops started harassing her, started following her. The cop who murdered her son started following her in traffic and pulling her over, going to the house, like harassing the mother of her child who was just murdered by you. Anyways, the whole thing's so upsetting and disturbing. And I see these people going through this process, and, you know, you've been doing this so long, and the words are like, you know, the families of people killed by law enforcement in LA and how brutal it is and how awful it is. So those are words, but the actual experience of what happens to like good people in families when they're visited by violence and murder by law enforcement is just like overwhelming. I know you've had other cases like this. And what else can you tell us about this particular one?
Well, they had an attorney before, but that attorney, for some reason, decided not to take the case. So I've asked for the file from them. But what I find interesting, or what I find disturbing, Sam, is that the internal affairs investigation report is not being made readily available to the families. And there's no state policy that requires that. And there have been attempts in the past to make that happen, but it's been resisted by the police unions.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's because they don't want any scrutiny, and they want to be investigated by their own agencies, which I don't think is a good idea. It's never objective. But they want to be able to hide the ball and do whatever they want to do with impunity. And if we're in this is a civilian society, this is a civilian law enforcement agency, they need to be subject to some types of checks and balances.
Right.
But scrutiny.
Right, but that's the whole problem with law enforcement, is that it's a closed system, even in a place like LA, where they have things like Teams 2, which is the last thing that needed to be implemented from the last consent decree that the LAPD was on in 2010. Teams 2 is the early warning system for bad apples, right? But what it does is it flags you if there's an anomaly. If a white cop suddenly starts to have all his arrests be African-American, it gets flagged. They look and they go, oh, he was moved from, Santa Monica to Watts. So that makes sense. But it gets flagged. It goes all the way up to the police commissioner has to sign off on every complaint. I'm sure his assistant's doing it. So it's some like old, outmoded software, and it's a closed system. There's no stakeholders. There's no community eyes on it. It's just the cops talking about themselves and, what they're doing wrong. And so that's not helpful. So it's a closed system. I want to ask you this. We're in, the Black Lives Matter, I want to say the Black Lives Matter, global uprising, but really what I think what happened with George Floyd was that it was a global intervention against the United States of America for its human rights violations around the murder of people of color by law enforcement. And so since then, the world's a different place, but is it? So going forward in your work, even with this case with Christopher Alvarez in Santa Ana, but also, immigration cases, and also your work in Pasadena. Jaime, what do you see? What's coming? What's your observations and your experience?
Well, we have good news in LA County. George Gascon has been elected to the district attorney's office, and he has a mandate. He made a lot of promises of reform, and and I know he's gonna meet some resistance by folks in his office, but who gives a damn?
Right.
Voted him in, and that's what the people of the LA County wants to see. My hope is that whatever reforms he does.
And you're talking about the former DA of San Francisco, who's now just got elected after Jackie Lee Lacey, the DA who was very, it wasn't really controversial. She prosecuted one cop in the entire time she was in office since 2012 for, police violence in LA, where they kill more people. Law enforcement kills more people than anybody. Please go on.
Right. So I consider Jackie Lacey to be a blackface on a reactionary white agenda. The hope was that she was going to go in there and do the appropriate reforms to resolve a lot of the social ills or the inequities of our system, but she didn't do it. She was part of the old boys club. She was their lapdog, and she did their bidding, and now she's gone.
Completely financed by the police union.
She's the candidate. Yeah. Oh yeah, she's their puppet. But now we've got Gascon, man, and Gascon has very progressive views. He was the former chief of police of Tempe, Arizona, and he was defying Sheriff Arpaio, when he was trying to use the sheriff's department to deport folks.
What county was he from? That Democratic county, right? Mariposa County, didn't they just turn blue?
Yeah, they just did, man. And he tried to run again, but they slammed his ass. They were done with him.
Yeah, he's on the ticket with Kanye, right? Anyways, but what we're saying, that Jackie Lacey's gone, and now here we go. We got a new DA. Everyone is like happy, but also, of course, very cautiously sort of optimistic.
Well, it's yes, and that's the type of change I think. He was voted in on a mandate, and I think that Biden and Kamala were voted in with this mandate to reform the criminal justice system, and to
Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are going to reform it. Excuse me, go on.
They rode on the wave of BLM, and they appropriated a lot of Bernie's words. To get elected,
right?
And the fucked up part is that we were so scared of Trump that we were scrambling to vote for Biden because Trump is like the extreme, whereas he made Biden seem moderate, and in reality, Biden is a blue dog Democrat. He tends to be
a cop guy. He likes the cops.
Yeah.
He says he wants to fund the cops more, but that was just, look, he's just a politician, right? And great. So maybe he'll be great to usher this thing a whole out, and maybe Kamala's woke now, and I don't think so, but we'll see what happens. On their behalf, American politics, again, is corrupt, and, we're talking about corporate capitalism, so there's extreme limitations about where this could all go. That said, we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens, but it doesn't help when he's appointing to his transition team Cecilia Munoz has a record of being reactionary when it comes to immigration policies. People voted him because we want to see the DREAM Act, and we want to see DACA re-implemented, and we want to see TPS re-implemented.
That's a great thing.
I'm sorry?
And that's a great thing, right? Those are the good things. Those are the really positive things that Donald Trump was so hideous. But when you really pull back and look at, here's all the policies of Donald Trump, here's all the policies of Joe Biden, it's not all that different. And I know.
And then, you know what, bro? All these years of having empty promises from the Democratic Party, these Democratic candidates, we'll see, man. I think that they have a mandate, the public. But so did Obama, and he blew it by trying to kiss up to the fucking Republicans when he had a Senate majority, and he blew it. So Is Biden going to blow it? And then you already hear the pundits talking about, well, Biden's in power now. The leftists need to let go of their agenda, and so they're trying to recenter the party to the center, recenter the party when the party was pretty much voted in by the left and immigrants.
Yeah, and black women of color,
black women and Mexican Americans. And
not in Miami.
Most Latinos voted for Biden.
I know, isn't it amazing? And like just the fact that like when you think, because I was thinking about it, I was out shooting all of these BLM protests these last months in LA, and every time I was there, I was like, let me talk to the class of 2020. Let me talk to these young people and see what's on their mind. And like when Biden like became the candidate, and I just thought about, how do you show this old man to these kids who are out these young people who are out in the streets and say like, okay, here's the guy. It's this guy, Joe Biden. He's like Mr. Burns for president. And it's like, oh my God. So yeah, it's the bad white guy against the good white guy. One more time, it's Reagan, it's Nixon. It's the same old game, except for the stakes are higher and people are dying and Donald Trump's a creep and, whatever. But I want to ask you, I want to wrap it up. I want to ask you one last question. And, it's a general question, but it's the question that people don't really want to talk about that much for reasons I don't understand. It's like, okay, we get the problems. How do we move forward in a good way? What's the plan? What do you see? What do you think would make things a lot better?
In with regards to what?
It's regards to anything. I mean, if it was I was answering that question, I would say, well, let's end this centralized two-party corporate America system and start moving into something that's more not necessarily tribal, but tribal, or something where everybody gets to access a little bit of the power, and the electoral college and corporate capitalism aren't part of the mix. And that's my dream.
Well, one, we need to take the money out of campaigns, period, because it attracts the wrong type of people to be our leadership. And not just that, but it pulls the right type, righteous people want to join, they do join, but then they're forced into this abnormal relationship of compromise and selling out the public. And so that needs to, and then we have to open it up to multiple parties. Like most countries will have different parties align in order to create a majority, I mean, that teaches us how to compromise and share. But I really appreciate the work that's going on with the environment and Black Lives Matter. I think that gives me hope. But we're seeing the next generation, man. They're taking the lead, and they're done with racism, and they're done with the destruction of our earth, and they're very aggressive, and they're out in the streets, and I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, they're done with a lot of other stuff too, like gender binaries and homophobia. Yeah. The class of 2020 is dissolving toxic masculinity, and they're doing it like on TikTok and on social media. And they're doing it with like age appropriate jokes and all that stuff. But like Occupy had a huge impact, and it was a huge service. And from my perspective, it was the beginning of what led to this new generation of people who are just like not with any of this stuff, this toxicity, right, and these constructs that are so destructive in our country and our culture, I
agree. I think that's where the dialogue really started, the real dialogue, the tangible reality dialogue. I'm a big fan of Chris Hedges, of course, Bernie, Professor Wolf, all these guys that are breaking it down, man, in a very real way. It's good stuff. And I would say to some extent it's very therapeutic, because I'm not internalizing the political crap that's being imposed on us. I'm contextualizing it.
Yes.
It's very important for people to do. But it's not enough for us to sit here and watch this and have great dialogues and break it all down. We need to be in the streets. We need to be in the courtrooms. We need to, wherever we are, make a righteous stand, and I think that with that, we're going to turn the curve, that we're going to make that turn towards righteousness. But it needs to happen, and people need to stand up.
That's excellent. Jaime, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for talking to me. We'll be following up. I'll be following you in Pasadena with Christopher Alvarez. I'll be watching what you're doing at immigration and just kind of seeing where you're at. I'll probably run into the street before I see you online again, but let's regroup and do this again soon, okay?
Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much. All right, everybody. There's Jaime Gutierrez. I'll come back next week with him, or in 2 weeks from whenever he's around and available, and follow up on him. Keep watching. For everybody else, I got a couple interviews lined up and a couple protests I'm going to be at soon. So keep your eyes on us, okay? Thank you.